Okay. Now, again, we talked about this yesterday real quick. I would do anything to go back and catch the climate. What's up, man? Can you find it? Where's it at?
I was reading on my bookshelf. Oh, this guy look a little hard.
Hey, if you want it again, come see me. You got it. Okay, so we talk about this. I would do anything I could to just go back and just catch the climate of the mood of the fight of the century. That'd be amazing, 1910. The build up to that fight. I mean, obviously we don't have all the technology today to hype it up as much, but I just think it'd be fantastic. Anyway, so we talked, the reason why I started with that, I told you guys yesterday, it kind of reinforces how Reconstruction fails the equality, the freedom for the African Americans. And these guys are just walking testaments of it. And guys that were actually at a very publicized position, too, being in the boxing world. Now, Reconstruction, very gradual process. And as we mentioned, it's the second civil rights movement. But we're going to see the old kind of getting replaced by the new. But you guys can see, the old's going to kind of hold on here. It's not going to give up without a fight. And many things will kind of, that pendulum will swing back the other way. Now, we already did this. We defined freedom. It's different for everyone. And again, you guys gave multiple definitions of freedom. Think of African Americans. They're not one voice, right? They're not just one person. So again, we need to make sure we remind ourselves of that. If we look at here, we see these two. You guys saw this. Especially Jack Johnson. African Americans weren't comfortable with him, a lot of them, because they thought they were making him look bad. Because they know that white people judge him, and they judge him all the same, right? They kind of take these mental shortcuts. This is psychology is what it is. We take heuristics. This is why we have these stereotypes and these prejudices, because of that psychology. Now, one thing I want you guys to make sure you check out with the Reconstruction, it's considered by many African American historians as the second American Revolution for African Americans. Because it's revolutionary getting African Americans' rights in America, especially the South. So we see that this is kind of a revolutionary thing that, Washington crossing the Delaware here, I just kind of put, you guys recognize that dude? He's probably, I would say, one of my favorite African American leaders of all time that I've come across. Frederick Douglass, who ran side by side with Abraham Lincoln. He was a man who actually got his own freedom, taught himself how to read, and he is somebody who's a brilliant speaker. Now we cast up to the South because we looked at this already, de jure versus de facto. De jure, the South puts laws in place. De facto does not. And we'll talk briefly about that. We got Oberlin, we got Ohio State, we have the lynchings in the North. Okay, looking at these two, one in Minnesota, one in Indiana. You see the lynching, racism, prejudice is all over the place. It's not just in the South. And again, we're going to remind ourselves of that because we do want to cast stones at the South. Now, looking at this picture. What's this picture, Catherine? Boston Massacre. Anybody see what's missing? Yeah, African American people. And one particular African American. Anybody know what African American was going to be one of the first to die here in the little skirmish leading up to the Revolutionary War in 1770? Okay, I want you guys to jump on Google Classroom. I want you guys to read up on the gentleman's name. Here's who's missing in this photograph. Pause this recording.
Which one is it?
Christmas is not in this painting, right? Yeah, well, the man missing. What is the artist here failed to put in this picture, as you mentioned? Yeah, right? Christmas Attic, she's missing. When we look at this, again, we want to make sure we look at the history and we see the power of the portrait, power of the painting, and we can see how the omission of Christmas Attic, this is what kind of war? We see only who in this crowd? White men. Okay, it's a male, the Revolutionary War we look at, as idealistic as it sounds, as idealistic as it is, it's an amazing thing it leads to in many regards. We do see kind of neglect, okay, who it's missing here. We see somebody else come in and actually paint maybe a little more accurate depiction of what's going on. And again, this isn't even accurate. They weren't even lined up like this. It was more chaotic. But we see Christmas addicts here get shot and killed. And we look at the American Revolutionary War, and we forget the fact, and again, we kind of look at history, And you got magnifying glass. What do we focus on? Nobody really ever mentions that 5,000 African Americans actually fought in the American Revolution. They're kind of written out of the war. It's really, if you look at the American Revolution, it's really talks about George Washington, talks about your founding fathers, your Patrick Henrys, give me liberty, give me death. It doesn't really focus on any kind of, historians don't focus on the African American. And again, we need to remind ourselves, why would that be? Well, when this war goes on, and the 20 years, 40 years, 50 years after it, people aren't writing about the African American experience, right? They're kind of just put to the wayside. They're invisible a lot of times, oftentimes in America. Again, we need to remind ourselves of that. Now, with the we the people, we're looking at this very vague language. When we look, it does not address who is actually those who are equal, who is a citizen in the United States. But we do know that although the mixed Indian African American Crispus Attucks and his people will not, people like him will not get the protection under the Constitution as we see. Now, I do want you guys to jot down the American Revolution is going to be speaking a lot about liberty, a lot about freedom. This is going to be something that African Americans kind of jump into and say, oh my gosh, it could be us. This could be us. And we see it's going to kind of inspire many African Americans to kind of pursue and want to join in, as I mentioned, 5,000 on this dream called liberty. So it's going to be something that rejuvenates. And we see that this is the first time really people are talking about, African Americans are talking about being free. It was just one of those things, it was, okay? Now, there's going to be a great debate, actually, that many people don't talk about slavery with the Founding Fathers. They're talking about, what should we do with all these slaves? We're talking liberty. It kind of sounds hypocritical to cry that we want to be free while we're keeping people in chains. And if we look at this, those who actually are anti-slavery at this time are actually going to not be very loud in protesting this hypocrisy. And why is that? It's because they need the South. They need the Southern colonies to be successful in the American Revolution. So you see, and that's something I want you to jot down, you see that actually the Founding Fathers, those who are people actually, who are leaders in the American 13 colonies, they're actually not going to protest very loudly with the anti-slavery because they know that the South won't join them. And they need the Southern support. If we're going to defeat the British, who's the baddest military on the planet at this time, we're going to need all 13 colonies to kind of pull together here. So this is the reason why they kind of push it to the wayside, sweep it under the rug, kind of ignore it. And what do the times have to do with it? This is the context. We need to remind ourselves of the Founding Fathers. Okay, virtually all of them owned slaves. Think about that. So this is be a big, drastic change for these guys, these Founding Fathers. Now these are the two that didn't of those in the considered Founding Fathers that at least the textbook highlighted. You guys recognize him? He actually is the one who defended the soldiers from the Boston Massacre. He actually defended him. John Adams. And the other one is, he writes the best breakup letter in American history. Thomas Jefferson. You can say Thomas Jefferson. I shouldn't say that. I guess that would be it was a joke. But it would be the biggest breakup book in American history. You talk about use your sense. Common sense. There's pain. Okay, use your common sense. Break up with the British. Okay, so we see Thomas Paine, John Adams. They did not own slaves, but we know this guy did. And here's Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That among them are life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness. Okay, and when he says that all men are created equal, he's talking about white men, and it's going to be literal men. Are the ones that we could focus on women as well, not being brought to the level of white males in society. And then think about being a black female. Double it, okay? And we'll see that as well. We'll talk a little bit about that. So here's a little write-up in the editor looking for a runaway from the Fubs Driver. I don't know how to pronounce that. In Albemarle, I'll butcher all these. A mulatto slave called Sandy, about 35 years of age. His stature is rather low, inclining to corpulence, and his complexion light. He is a shoemaker by trade, in which he uses his left hand principally, can do horse carpenter's work, is something of a horse jockey. Those S's are screwed on there. He is greatly addicted to drink, and when drunk is insolent, and disorderly. In his conversation, he swears much, and in his behavior is artful and knavish. Help me out, Sadie or Andy or Kenzie. Knavish. He took with him a white horse, much scarred with traces, of which it is expected he will endeavor to disfuse. He also carried his shoemaker's tools and will probably endeavor to get employment that way. Whoever conveys the said slave to me, in Albemarle, shall have $40, reward, if taken up within country, for L, again, we can probably look that up, so that is, if elsewhere within the colony, and 10L, if in any other colony. From, you're not going to believe who that was. What was that dude that wrote that? Okay, that's Thomas Jefferson. Okay, that actually wrote this. And the slave will be captured, and he get the worst treatment slaves get. He will be arguably, he'll be traded, he'll be sold. Okay, so now that comfortability he had within his slave community, it's now gone. He's sold to somebody else. So Thomas Jefferson actually does track that guy down, and he gets him back. So we look at our founding father, Thomas Jefferson, who we look at very highlight. We need to make sure we remind ourselves that he is kind of at the forefront of part of this slave society. And he's going to own, he has 100 slaves when he writes this. He's going to have over, I think, 200 by the time he dies. So we see this guy invested in the slave game. Now, if we look at this, who flees, by the way? What? 35-year-old what? Male or female? Male, okay? We need to remind ourselves, oftentimes the runaway slaves were actually at least single males, because women taking children would be very difficult to get away. So women actually had to stay, if they had children, normally, had to stay back with their family, which I think it's something we need to remind ourselves as well. So, if we look at Thomas Jefferson, going back to historiography, this is how our opinions and our facts and history changes over time. You know, Thomas Jefferson, you could argue, is still in a very high esteem, but that can change. You know, if you talk about, for example, when Thomas Jefferson, when George Washington, when George Washington in his will, when he's dying, he says, I want to free all 300 slaves when my wife dies. I want them all free. Okay? And you'll see that those slaves actually get freed by Martha Washington. And Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, he won't free any slaves except one. And that was Sally Heming, who was a slave who he had what with? Children. He actually had children with Sally. Okay? And they checked DNA and they traced it back with almost certainty that Thomas Jefferson and old Sally, okay, after his wife died, are going to have an intimate relationship, and he's going to impregnate her. So if we look at Thomas Jefferson, we could focus on slaves. You could focus on the fact that he declared independence from the British, and focus on positives. And again, life is a gray area. It's not good and evil all the time. It's in between. When we look at Thomas Jefferson, we could see maybe a push for a change on his image. Like, for example, Christopher Columbus. When I was growing up, Christopher Columbus was viewed as a positive thing. He was a positive presence in America. He helped found America and all these things. Now, he brought what? Yeah, pain and suffering. And if you look, when they look at this stuff, oftentimes it's centennials. Oftentimes it's celebration of 100-year. We value 100 around in America. We value the 50-year anniversaries. Okay, and we look at every 100 years. You kind of have people start to get interested again. They look, and then whatever journalists or historians focus on will be what we believe, right? When we read these secondary source accounts. So we look at Thomas Jefferson. His statues could be taken down one day. It could, okay? Because you could focus, maybe he sexually exploited his slaves. It could be a focus. Or, he was brutal. Monticello, I've never been there, but they say you can't really see the plantation when you go down there. But they say that a lot of children are forced to work long hours, and, I think nails, they made nails with a handrail. But you're looking at, this is Thomas Jefferson. So again, and I'm not trying to sway your opinion, it's just stuff I came across. And it's stuff when you remind ourselves that this all can change. History is not static. Okay? The dust is always moving. Now, context to how we got slavery in America. This is just a quick overview. I took these theories from, there's two books over here that they talk about geography. And geography and history go hand in hand, and psychology as well. And human beings like the path of least resistance. So if you're going to an apple tree or a peach tree, you're more than likely going to take the lowest hanging because it's the easiest to get to. Okay? So we look here. We look at geography, places where we're on African history and psychology. Africa is a continent, okay, that has a very large desert in the north, and it has its rivers. They have a lot of waterfalls. They don't have a unifying river like America. America has Mississippi. It's just right down the middle, and branches out all the arteries, and it's very easy to travel across America. We have a low mountain range in the east. Africa's not very navigable, so it's not easy to travel up and down, east and west. So because of that, and you got obviously lions over there, rhinos, hippos kill more people than plane crashes here. Yeah, hippos are pretty violent. Okay, they got all these daggone animals over there that kill you, right? So we see that this is not a very easy place to travel. So as a result of these things, some historians have argued Europe was always backward. It was the most backward of all continents. Somehow it takes the lead in being the most technologically advanced. And people start asking, how did that happen? There's multiple theories, multiple arguments. But we do know one of the big arguments of why Africa falls behind is because of this great desert here, and it's not very navigable. So what happens when technology starts popping up all over the place, especially in China? China was known to be innovative as all get out still to this day. And Asia, a lot of these ideas that go from east to west and west to east, they don't travel north to south. So what happens in Africa? It kind of falls behind. Next thing about Africa, it's very divided because there's not that unifying factor of geography. So because you have all these different factions, they're going to be open for exploitation. And when these guys show up, and there's a simple statement, and I think it's in The Heart of Darkness. We had machine guns, they did. That's the big difference. You know, I mean, was that in The Heart of Darkness? Okay, yeah. So they have machine guns, we don't. They do. We have machine guns, they don't. So it's going to be somewhat easy to colonize. There's stories of these tribes and these people trying to overrun some of the French or some of the Germans, and they pull out the machine guns and they just charge and just get slaughtered. Okay. So we see that this is going to open up for exploitation. It's going to open up for slavery. Now, this is an illustration of a slave ship. And you guys can see there's about 18 inches between each of these things. So people are squeezed on. This be suffocating. And they're going to travel across this long journey across the Atlantic. And it took months to get across the Atlantic Ocean. They're living like this. If you were ill, they were thrown overboard. They're being brought over here from all kinds of different places in Africa. And we see this is slavery. Now, slavery's been around for a long period of time. Slavery is back from ancient Greece, but it's not. Ancient Greece its economy wasn't predicated, it wasn't dictated by the slavery. America, the New World, is going to be all about slavery as an economic machine. Okay? They need slaves over here to feed that machine. So we see, when I say need, use that word loosely, but they are going to really see the value in slaves. Now, slaves actually, Slav, it's actually from Slav, Mediterranean. It came from 15th century slave. That word is based off of Slav, from Slavic ancestry, because you still had some slaves from that area, the Slavic regions around the Mediterranean, still practicing slavery in the 15th century. But you're going to see it becomes a black African thing around the 16th, 17th century. Now, these movements are going to help. You got this eugenics movement, which I put an article on as well. You can read that right now. But we have, based off Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, there's this belief that why are these people able to take advantage of these people? According to Darwinism. Why would that be? They're more evolved. It's survival of the fittest. Okay? And they're going to take Charles Darwin's thoughts on that. Again, he wasn't big into the race factor, but they're going to take his thoughts on Darwinism. They're going to apply them to this movement, which is actually his half-cousin. This is Francis Galton is his name. He's really big in this eugenics movement. And we see this is going to be a movement that's going to be picked up by the Nazis. They're going to use it as well. Okay? So we see where the Nazis kind of stem from. This movement is really big at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. And we see that this eugenics movement is going to be a push that says that these people deserve to be slaves because they're not as civilized, they're not as advanced. One thing with the slavery coming over here, we need to remind ourselves, when these slaves come over, because it's so divided, because they come from everywhere, these people would never would have contacted one another. They never would have seen one another. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same customs. They're very different when they come over here, these slaves. The only thing that unifies them is freedom. And we see by the 19th century, 1800, that they're actually going to be consider themselves as African Americans, not as Africans. We see the shift kind of take place at that turn of the 18th, 19th century. Now, we look here, this freedom is a unifying force, but we see slavery economy. It's really, really big in the South. And the South views the African Americans as a bigger threat because 33% of the population is black in the South. That's 1 out of every 3. Where the North, there's not as many. And this is why we have de facto North versus de jure. De jure is much stricter, it's much harder. The reason being because blacks are seen as more of a threat in the South because there's more of them. But we see that America becomes very big in the slave economy. But you see North gears more towards industry, the South gears more towards agriculture, and you're going to see a bigger need for African Americans in the South than the North. Many African Americans in the North will be freed after the American Revolution. Okay, quite a few of them. Where in the South, it's going to be more hardened. So the slavery economy is big. If you look here, we can see the difference between North and South based off of technological progress. This map right here illustrates why the North would beat the South in the Civil War. It's just much more advanced, it's much more populated. It's able to mass produce goods. And if you see here, a lot of the railroads in the South, they came from the ports and they shot inward. And a lot of these lines are short. They just want to go from the agricultural plantations to the places of export and places of import to the plantations. So we can see much shorter, much less frequency of the plantations. And over here, we're looking at the plantations, we're looking at the populations. Actually, South Carolina will have, majority of their population will be African American for a while. Now, I'm trying to think. This is a concentration, this is the population areas in the South of African Americans. You can see heavily populated in the Deep South. Now, the Southern culture, we need to understand, remind ourselves, before the Civil War, the South was one of the 5 richest countries in the world, richest regions in the world. It is something that's very powerful, and it's built on the backs of slaves, okay, their economy. So whenever the Civil War breaks out, when the Civil War is over, African Americans are like, dude, we deserve land. We've worked this land. We deserve our freedom, and we deserve land as part of that freedom. Now, looking at cotton, this is the white gold, they call it. You have 75% of the world's market came from the South of cotton. And cotton is one of those crops, something to remind ourselves, it doesn't grow very high. So you'd have these overseers on their horseback. They could see if slaves were slacking at all. Where sugarcane, another thing that was produced more in the Caribbean, it has high stocks. So they could slack a little bit more. So we see cotton is going to be something you can oversee a lot of slaves with less overseers. So we see these people have to work long hours. Oftentimes, they would have maybe a Sunday reserved to themselves. And we see also, I point to remind ourselves, and I have freshmen, obviously you guys are on your route, probably go to college for the most part, but get skilled at something. Because you're going to see African Americans, those who are skilled, are going to have more power than those who don't. Whether it's a barber, whether it's somebody who can build stuff, they're going to have more freedom to get their own money on their own time versus somebody who doesn't. So we more have to follow their master. Now, we look here, I also put on there's going to be a lot of free blacks running around the South that will set up their own black communities. And they're going to be very proud about their black communities. And you'll see that these stay in the South. And there's an article, why do they stay down there? And you guys can read that if you want. I may actually have you read it. But we see that these African Americans with skills are going to be better served than those who don't. And slavery is something that's very, very difficult. It's very omnipotent, very powerful in the South. Now, white leaders, you look at this picture here, we can see they have the power, and they believe that they're a father-like figure to the blacks. They believe African Americans like working under their conditions. That's a big argument, that they don't want to leave. They want their free room and board, essentially. And we see whites believe themselves a father-like figure, and we'll see this theory get blown out of the water when the North invades the South, and we see all these slaves just follow the Northern armies throughout the South, like they just leave the plantation. It would be rare for a slave not to be whipped at least once. And we'll see slaves, the biggest thing they fear, though, was going to one of these auction and Negro sales. I mean, you can look at this place. And this is an actual store, a place you can go to yourself an African American, okay, at different prices based off of age, gender, appearance, and size, and all that stuff. So we have this. This to me is just very poignant. Just looking at a picture like this, just sad. And the biggest fear was the slave auction and the slave trade and selling, being sold. And we will see there's accounts of people being sold 18 times, traded 18 times. One saw his mother forced to breed on the plantation, and we can see that she was selected for that. And these people who bring them over, they do not care about family, ripping them apart. And when they separate, many of them will never see their family again. Probably the majority, my guess, would be very difficult to track people down at that point in time. So we see that this is the slave auction and the bidding going on, and they would hold about 300 in a pen here, and they would ship them on out where they're going. Now, how did whites keep power? They used the Bible, and white preachers will preach that slaves in the Bible, they follow their master. It's been going on since the Romans. Need to listen to the servants, need to listen to their master and stuff like that. We'll see that change over time. When African Americans learn how to read, they'll focus more on Moses, fleeing across the Red Sea, Exodus. They'll find things that rally around the sea to fight for their freedom. Again, they view themselves, the whites, as a paternalistic kind of father figure. Two big things when you remind ourselves with the power in the South, with the agency in the South. White slave owners had power of sex and beating over the black females population. We need to remind us of sexual exploitation. And again, we talked about Jefferson impregnating Sally. Here's a story of, what's her name? This girl here, fascinating story. She will, Celia, that's right, Celia. 1855, her master attempts to rape her, have sexual assault. She kills him. And she's going to be actually deemed to be sentenced to death. Sadly enough, though, Celia will have to wait because she's pregnant from another slave, and she'll have to wait until she gives birth, and they'll keep the baby and kill Celia. So this is kind of just the brutality of this place. That was 15 years before the Civil War. Oh, 6 years before the Civil War. This one here, Louisa, she is going to be owned by this baby because the baby's parents died. So ownership goes over there, so you can see their picture here. So we see just the power and the lack thereof for the African women. These are plantation mistresses, they're called. Oftentimes the owner of the plantation would maybe go do some work outside, or they'd find out about him sexually exploiting the slaves. This was something, though, but the plantation mistresses, they're going to be big into taking care of the slaves. They don't have as much power. They have to stay on the plantations oftentimes. But there's going to be accounts of the mistresses, plantation mistresses, sleeping with slaves as well. So we see that as well, which would be very taboo at the time, but it did happen. Here are two very famous people, Americans in history. You guys probably recognize the guy on the right. Who's that? You recognize that? Civil War? Robert E. Lee. He owned slaves. He was known to whip his slaves multiple times and pour salt water down their back just to make it burn. This one here I found interesting. I did not know this about Polk. Polk here is going to own slaves, and less than half actually ever lived to the age of 15 on a slave plantation. It's that brutal. He's a president of the United States, former president of the United States. I mean, this is who's running the show in America. But you see these two as examples. Here's a picture of Frederick Douglass. Now, before I move on, I am going to have you guys read. I want you guys to read I thought this was fascinating. We'll talk about it for a minute. Why did free blacks stay in the Old South?